The shelter smelled like rust and sadness. Mark stepped inside, wiping the cold rain from his jacket. Metal cages lined the walls, filled with alien children, some crying, some staring, some too tired to care anymore. The shelter worker didn't even look up as he spoke. They're all unwanted, abandoned after the war. Mark walked slowly between the cages, his boots echoed on the metal floor. Each child had a tag. Each face told a story of hunger and fear. He had no plan to adopt anyone, not really. He was just curious, lonely maybe. Then he saw her. At the very end of the shelter, past the broken lights and flickering wires, was a cage that looked darker than the others. Inside sat a small alien girl, maybe 8 or 9 in human years. Her skin was pale purple, her eyes downcast, her knees were pulled to her chest, and she didn't move, not even when he approached. "What about this one?" Mark asked. The worker's voice lowered, like he was afraid to be heard. "Her? That one's broken? She doesn't talk, doesn't eat much. She just exists. Some say she's cursed." Mark crouched in front of her cage. "What's her name?" "She never told us," the worker said. "She was found after the bombing, no records, no family." Mark didn't know why, but something about her silence spoke louder than the cries of the others. Her thin arms, her hollow eyes, the way she held herself like she didn't want to take up space, like she believed she had no right to live. "I'll take her," Mark said softly. The worker looked stunned. "Sir, are you sure?" "There are others. I'm sure." They handed him a release form, no questions, no ID checks. In this part of the galaxy, no one cared about orphan aliens, especially the quiet ones. Mark picked her up gently. She didn't resist, didn't speak. Her head rested against his shoulder like a doll, weightless and cold. He named her Lila on the way home, just to break the silence. She didn't respond. His house was small, hidden in the outer woods of Earth's colony planet Eden 6. No cities nearby, just trees and sky. He gave her a warm blanket, a bowl of soup, a soft bed, but she sat in the corner of the room, unmoving, staring at nothing. Days passed. She wouldn't eat unless he left the food near her and walked away. She didn't speak. She flinched at sudden noises, slept with her eyes open, and avoided mirrors like they would punish her. Mark tried everything. Jokes, toys, even music. But Lila remained silent, like a ghost living in a child's body. And yet, every morning, she was there, sitting quietly, in the same spot, as if waiting for something but not hope, something else. One rainy night, Mark sat by the fire, watching it crackle. He looked over at Lila, who was wrapped in a blanket near the window. Her eyes were open, staring into the storm. He sighed. "You don't have to talk, you don't have to smile, but just know, you're safe here, no one will hurt you again." Silence. He got up to go to bed, but paused when he heard it. A whisper, so soft he almost thought he imagined it. "Don't send me back." Mark turned around slowly. Lila was still facing the window, but her tiny shoulders were shaking. A tear slid down her cheek, and then another. She didn't look at him, but her voice trembled like glass about to break. "Please," she whispered again. "Don't send me back." He didn't ask where back was, he didn't need to. Mark walked to her side and knelt down. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, warm and steady. She didn't flinch this time. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "You're home now." For the first time, her head turned slightly. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw a galaxy of pain, and something else hidden deep inside, a spark. She blinked slowly, and her lips moved again. "Home," she repeated, like it was a word she'd never tasted before. Mark nodded, and the firelight flickered in her wet eyes. Outside, the storm howled through the trees, but inside that small wooden house, something had changed. Something had begun. She was no longer just the girl no one wanted. She was Lila, and she had a chance. Mark thought the hard part was over. After bringing Lila home, he thought once she whispered, "Don't send me back," things would start to heal. But healing, he soon learned, wasn't quick or simple. She still didn't speak the next morning. She didn't look him in the eyes, didn't respond to questions. She just sat quietly on the floor, blanket around her like armor. Mark made her pancakes and set them on the table. She stared at them for almost 15 minutes before eating one with her hands, slow and careful, like she was afraid it would disappear. Mark didn't ask questions. He didn't want to push her. So he just talked. About the weather, about the trees outside, about how noisy the birds were this season. He hoped that if he filled the silence with warmth, it might someday grow roots inside her. Each day passed like that. One word from him. A nod from her. One meal at a time. One quiet stare. And always the same question echoing in his heart. What had they done to her? On the fourth night, he left a small teddy bear on her bed. It was old, worn, and missing one eye, but soft. When he checked later, it was gone from the bed. The next morning, he found it carefully placed beside her pillow, not clutched in sleep, but not rejected either. Mark smiled. That was something. Still, Lila didn't explore the house, didn't ask for anything. She wouldn't go outside, not even to sit in the sun. She flinched every time the old pipes in the wall made a creak. And sometimes, when she thought Mark was asleep, she would sit in the corner and whisper to herself in a language he couldn't understand, soft and broken. It made his chest ache. One afternoon, Mark sat on the porch, fixing a busted old drone with his tools. He left the front door open, hoping the sound of birds and wind might tempt her out. He wasn't sure if she even liked the outdoors, but she needed more than four walls and quiet pain. Hours passed. Then out of the corner of his eye, he saw something move in the doorway. Lila stood there barefoot, blanket around her shoulders like a cloak. She didn't step outside, but her toes were on the wooden floor just past the threshold. Her eyes scanned the trees like she expected monsters to leap from the shadows. "You don't have to come out if you're not ready," Mark said gently, not turning to face her. "But the wind smells nice today." She didn't answer, but she stayed there for 10 minutes, then stepped back inside. That night she ate 2 pancakes without needing him to leave the room. Progress. The real change came the next day. Mark had gone into the small supply shed behind the house to grab a new filter for the heater. When he came back, he froze in the doorway. Lila was standing in the kitchen staring at the sink. It was running, not just dripping, but fully on. The water spilled over the dishes like a river. Her hands were shaking, her eyes wide, her breathing shallow. Mark rushed over and shut it off. "Hey, it's okay, it's just water," he said quickly. "Did it scare you?" She didn't respond, but her lips moved. He leaned in, and she finally whispered, "The sound. It's the same. The tubes, where they kept us." Mark's stomach turned cold. "Tubes?" he asked gently, but she backed away, tears forming. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to break anything." "You didn't break anything, Lila," he said. "Nothing here is broken, not even you." Her lip trembled, and she looked at the floor. He took a deep breath and knelt beside her. "This is your home now. If something scares you, you can tell me. You don't have to hide anymore." She looked up at him slowly. "I'm not allowed to speak," she said, almost like she was repeating someone else's rule. "They said silence keeps us alive." Mark's heart twisted. "That rule doesn't exist here, Lila. Not in this house." She blinked. "But if I speak, what if they find me?" "They won't," he promised. "I won't let them." Lila looked at him for a long time, like she was searching for any sign of a lie in his face. But Mark's eyes were steady, calm, real. That night, while sitting by the fire again, Lila did something she'd never done before. She spoke. "I used to hum," she said softly. "Before they took me, I liked to hum when it rained." Mark smiled. "Do you remember the tune?" She nodded slowly. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began to hum, a soft, haunting melody that didn't belong to any human song, but was beautiful and sad at the same time. Mark didn't say anything. He just listened, and when she finished, she leaned her head on his arm. For the first time, Lila chose to sit beside him, and she stayed until she fell asleep. Mark noticed the first strange thing 3 days after Lila spoke to him. He had left a glass cup on the table. It had a crack in it from weeks ago. Mark kept forgetting to throw it out. That afternoon, while washing dishes, he saw the cup again, but the crack was gone. The glass looked perfect, like brand new. He frowned, thinking maybe he replaced it and forgot. He shrugged it off. But the next morning, his old watch, broken since last winter, was ticking again on the kitchen shelf. "You fix this?" he asked Lila casually, holding up the watch. She was sitting on the floor, humming softly. The same melody she had hummed before. Her eyes lifted to look at the watch, then dropped back down. "I didn't touch it," she whispered. "I just thought it was sad." Mark chuckled. "Sad?" She nodded. It looked lonely, like it missed ticking. That night, Mark lay in bed thinking, it was probably just coincidence. Maybe he fixed the watch a while ago and forgot. Maybe the cup wasn't cracked at all. Maybe his brain was tired, but the next day erased all doubt. Mark had an old greenhouse behind the house. He used to grow herbs and small vegetables. But after a storm last year, the roof shattered and most of the plants died. The glass panels were broken and vines had overgrown the place. He hadn't opened it in months. That morning, while chopping wood outside, Mark saw Lila walking slowly toward the greenhouse, barefoot. Her blanket trailed behind her. Her hand reached out to touch the door and it creaked open on its own. He dropped the axe and ran to her. "Lila! Careful, there's broken glass in there." But when he reached her, she was already standing inside the greenhouse, barefoot on the floor, surrounded by vines, and none of them touched her. In fact, they moved away from her gently, like bowing. The broken glass that should have cut her feet was gone. Mark looked around in disbelief. The vines had curled up neatly along the walls. The shattered panels above were whole again. Sunlight poured in like it hadn't in over a year, and the plants were blooming. Flowers, he thought, were dead, were standing tall, green and bright. Tomatoes were ripe, herbs full and fresh. Lila stood in the center of it all, her eyes wide as if even she didn't understand what was happening. "Did you do this?" he asked, voice soft. Lila looked down, hugging herself. "I didn't mean to." "You're not in trouble," he said quickly. I've never seen anything like this." She nodded slowly. "Sometimes, when I feel safe, things fix themselves." That night, Mark sat at the fireplace, lost in thought. He had read about alien children with special traits, but most were monitored closely, trained, or taken by governments. Lila had slipped through, the cracks left behind, forgotten. But she was not normal, not by any species standards. She had powers, and not just random powers. They were tied to emotion, to safety, to care. When she felt safe, things healed. The next proof came in a more dangerous way. A wild dog from the woods had wandered too close to the house. Mark didn't see it at first, but Lila did. She screamed, a sound that made the trees shake, and the dog lunged. Mark grabbed a stick and ran outside, heart racing, but before he could swing, Lila stepped between them. "Stop," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. The dog froze mid-air, paws still in the air, body trembling. It dropped to the ground like it had been pushed by wind, tail tucked. It crawled backward, whining, before running off into the forest. Mark was shaking, not from fear of the dog, but from what he had just witnessed. Lila turned to him, eyes glowing faintly, not bright, not dangerous, just shining. "I didn't want it to hurt you," she said. Mark slowly knelt down. "You protected me." She nodded. "I think you're very special, Lila," he whispered. "But we need to be careful now, okay?" "Because of them?" she asked. Mark hesitated. "Who's them?" "The ones who made me," she said softly. "They watch sometimes, even when you don't see them." Mark's blood went cold. "Here?" Lila shook her head. "Not yet, but if I use too much, they'll come." Mark realized something then. She wasn't just a lost child with strange gifts, she was something they had built, something they wanted back. But now, she was his, and he wasn't going to let anyone take her. It started with a shadow in the sky. Mark was outside gathering firewood when he saw it. A black dot against the bright blue, silent, hovering, too still to be a bird, too slow to be a regular patrol drone. He watched it for a few seconds, then it vanished behind the clouds. His gut twisted. Something wasn't right. That night, Lila didn't sleep near the fire like usual. Instead, she sat under the table, knees tucked to her chest. Her humming had stopped completely. Her eyes kept darting toward the windows. "They're looking," she whispered, when Mark asked what was wrong. "They're close now." Mark tried to comfort her. "It was just a drone, maybe a weather scan. We're far from the cities. No one cares about this place." But Lila shook her head. "It's not the government, you know. It's the part that's hidden." Mark didn't ask more that night. Her voice had a fear in it he hadn't heard before. And when she clutched his arm tightly, trembling like she did in the shelter, he knew this wasn't just fear, it was memory. The knock came the next morning. 3 sharp knocks at the door, clean and perfect like a machine had practiced it. Mark froze, axe still in his hands from chopping firewood. He stepped to the door and opened it slowly. 2 men stood there. One wore a black coat with no insignia. The other had a silver badge clipped to his chest. They didn't smile, didn't introduce themselves. "Are you Mark Reeves?" the taller one asked. Mark nodded slowly. "I am. What's this about?" "We're looking into illegal shelter adoptions," the man said smoothly. "Some children may have been moved without proper clearance. Mind if we come in?" Mark hesitated. "She's not a criminal," he said sharply. "She's a child." The shorter agent tilted his head. "We haven't even said who she is." Mark's heart dropped. Before he could reply, Lila peeked around the corner. Behind him, her eyes were wide, skin pale. The taller man stepped forward immediately, scanning her with a device from his pocket. The scanner blinked red, then turned blue. "That's her," the man said. "We've found subject 7A. She has a name," Mark snapped, stepping between them. "Her name is Lila. She's property," the agent replied coldly. "And she wasn't meant to leave the facility." "I didn't steal her," Mark said. "She was in a shelter, locked in a cage." The shorter man smirked. "We know. That shelter was paid to keep failed." Subject's quiet. "Looks like someone got sloppy." Lila tugged on Mark's sleeve, whispering, "Don't let them take me, please." Mark looked into her eyes, then turned back to the men. "You're not taking her." The tall agent reached for something on his belt. "That's not your choice." Before he could draw the weapon, the floor beneath him cracked slightly. A soft hum filled the air. The lights flickered and the wind outside howled without touching a single leaf. Lila stepped forward slowly. Her small hand rose just slightly. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said, "but I won't go back." The scanner in the agent's hand sparked and died. The air around her shimmered, and the house felt like it was holding its breath. The agents froze, suddenly unsure. Their eyes locked on the girl who once cried in a cage. Now standing tall with power in her voice, the taller one whispered, "She's fully active." Mark took a deep breath. "You need to leave now. She's not yours anymore." The agents didn't argue. They backed out of the door slowly, promising to return with backup. Mark slammed the door shut and locked it, then looked at Lila. "What was that?" he asked gently. She sat down on the floor, breathing hard. "I don't know. It just happens when I get scared." "They'll come back," Mark said. "We have to be ready." "I can run," Lila said softly. "I've done it before." "No," Mark replied firmly. "You're not running again. Not alone. If we run together." She looked up at him, tears forming. "Even if it's dangerous?" "Especially then," he said. "Because you're not a subject, you're not a tool, you're my daughter now." Lila's lips trembled. "Really?" Mark nodded. "They can scan you, label you, chase you, but they don't get to name you. I do, and I choose Lila. I choose you." Outside, clouds gathered in the sky, thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside the little house, something stronger than fear began to grow, a bond not made in blood, but in choice, and the girl no one wanted was no longer alone. The fire crackled softly as the storm raged outside. Mark sat on the floor beside Lila. The lights dimmed, not from damage, but because she wanted it that way. Bright light made her flinch. She said it reminded her of the labs, for the past few hours. Neither of them had spoken. Mark had locked every door, closed the blinds, and shut off all signals. He had no idea how long before the agents returned, but he knew this quiet wouldn't last. Lila held the old teddy bear he had given her, her arms wrapped tightly around it, not for play, but for protection. Mark finally broke the silence. Lila, who were those people really? Where did they take you before I found you? She didn't look up. She kept staring at the fire. Her voice came low and soft, like she was telling a bedtime story from a nightmare. They called it Facility Echo 7, she said. It looked like a hospital, but it wasn't one. There were no windows, only white lights, metal walls, and cold floors. Mark listened, heart heavy. She wasn't speaking like a child. She was remembering like a survivor. They brought many like me, she whispered. Children from broken planets, from wrecked ships, or from poor colonies. They said we were lucky to be chosen. But it wasn't luck, Mark said quietly. Lila shook her head. They put us in chambers. Some had wires. Others had lights. That made our heads hurt. They said they were teaching us how to be useful, but the ones who cried too much disappeared. Mark clenched his jaw. They experimented on you? Yes, she whispered. But not just to hurt. They were trying to make something. Make what? He asked. Weapons, she said. Living ones. Ones that could move without being seen, heal fast, control energy. But they made a mistake with me. Mark leaned forward. What mistake? I wasn't angry enough, Lila said, her voice trembling. The powers they wanted came from pain, from hate. But I didn't want to hurt anyone, I just wanted someone to hold my hand. Mark felt a tear slip down his cheek. So, they threw you away, Lila nodded. They called me Unit 7A emotional defective, and they said I failed the trials, so they left me in that shelter. Not to save me, but to disappear quietly. He couldn't speak. His hands were shaking, rage bubbling under the surface. They treated her like a broken tool, not a child. Lila looked up at him slowly. You're the first person who ever asked. My name? Mark placed his hand over hers. You're not defective. You're the bravest soul I've ever met. A tear rolled down her cheek. But this time it wasn't just from pain. It was from relief. That night, as she slept beside the fire, her breathing steady for once, Mark stood by the window, staring into the dark forest. He knew they would come back, and now he knew why they wanted her so badly, not just for her powers, but because she was proof their system had failed. She was alive, emotional, and powerful. Not because of their cold training, but because someone had finally shown her love. The next day, Mark began building. He upgraded the locks, rewired the house to run off a silent generator, and placed barriers around the greenhouse, not with high-tech weapons, but with old Earth tricks, smoke mirrors, noise traps, and motion alerts. Lila helped without asking. When he lifted tools, she floated them to his hands. When he dropped screws, they rolled back to his feet. She didn't say much, but her silence was different now. Not empty, but focused. That evening, as they shared warm soup in silence, Lila finally asked a question. Why didn't you give me back when they knocked? She asked softly. Most people would have. Mark looked at her and smiled. Because most people don't know what treasure looks like when it's covered in dust. She blinked. I'm treasure. You're rare. You're strong. You survived something awful. And even after all that, you still hum to yourself at night. Lila looked down, shy and unsure. Mark leaned closer. You deserve better than what the galaxy gave you. And if I have to fight to keep you safe, then so be it. For a moment she didn't move. Then she reached out, placed her small hand in his and whispered, Thank you, Dad. Mark froze. He had no blood connection to her, no reason to risk his life. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. She had chosen him and he had chosen her long ago. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the wind, unaware that inside that small house, a soldier was being born, not from war or training, but from the quiet, steady strength of love. The knock didn't come this time. It was the silence that warned him. The birds stopped singing, the trees stood still, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Mark stepped outside with a slow, careful pace, axe in hand, eyes scanning the sky. A black transport ship hovered just above the treetops. Sleek, silent, and unmistakably government-built. It didn't land, it didn't speak, but it was there, watching, waiting. Mark stepped back inside and locked the door behind him. His face was calm, but his heart pounded. He knew they were getting ready. They weren't asking anymore. This time, they were coming to take her. Lila stood in the hallway holding her teddy bear. Her eyes were wide but not surprised. "They're here," she whispered. Mark nodded slowly. "I saw." "We should run," she said, her voice shaking. "I can. Hide again. I don't want you to get hurt because of me." Mark looked at her. This tiny alien girl with too many scars and too much silence for her age, and he shook his head. "No more running," he said firmly. "You're not a mistake to hide. You're my family now." "But they won't stop," Lila said. "They'll chase me to the ends of the stars. Then I'll go with you to the ends of the stars," Mark replied. "But I'm not handing you over, not today, not ever." She blinked, stunned. "Even if they hurt you?" He knelt in front of her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Even if they destroy everything I have." The rest of that day was spent preparing. Mark packed a small bag, tools, food, his old sidearm, a broken comm unit just in case. He wrapped the old teddy bear in Lila's blanket, then gave it back to her. "He'll be scared too," he said, smiling. "You'll have to protect him." Lila smiled faintly for the first time in days. Before nightfall, Mark led her through the woods behind the house. There was an old path, barely used and covered in roots, but he remembered it. It led to a ridge high above the valley where an emergency hideout was carved into the rock years ago during the colony wars. It was dusty, small, and smelled like oil, but it was hidden, and it was safe. For now, they reached the cave just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in orange and violet. Mark lit a small lantern inside, careful to keep the flame low. Lila sat against the wall, hugging the teddy bear, her legs curled beneath her. "Do you think they'll find us?" she asked. Mark didn't answer right away. He stared at the opening of the cave, listening for ships or boots or engines. "I don't know," he said finally. "But if they do, they'll have to come through me first." That night, while Lila slept with her head resting on his coat, Mark sat outside the cave, rifle across his lap, staring at the stars. He had never planned to be a father. He was just a man with a quiet life and a past no one talked about. But now he wasn't just a man. He was a protector, because she had chosen him, and he had chosen her. In the early hours of morning, the comm unit in his bag sparked. A soft signal beeped through, static, followed by a voice. "This is Command Alpha. Subject 7A has been located. Agents en route, prepare containment." Mark crushed the device under his boot, grinding it into the dirt until only broken parts remained. They were coming. The sun rose slowly, turning the valley gold. Lila woke to find Mark already standing by the cave entrance, gear strapped to his back, jaw set. "We can go farther," she said, standing beside him. "There's a mining route that leads into the mountains." Mark shook his head. "No more running." "Then what?" she asked, voice small. "We hide again?" "No," he said. "We make a stand right here." Her eyes widened. "But we can't fight them." Mark looked down at her and smiled. "You don't have to fight them, Lila." She stared at him in confusion. "But they want me. And they'll have to get through me," he said. "And I've survived worse than men in black coats." She blinked. "You used to be a soldier?" Mark nodded slowly. Long ago, before peace came, before I wanted a quiet life, I was trained to protect, trained to defend. I just never knew I'd be defending something this precious. Lila stepped forward and hugged him tightly. "You're not like them," she whispered. "You don't want power. You just want me to be okay." Mark held her close. "That's all I want." As the sound of ships echoed faintly in the distance, as shadows moved through the trees far below, Mark made his choice final. He would not run. He would not surrender. He would stand between her and the world, and if this was the end, then he would face it, not with fear, but with the love of a child who had once whispered, "Don't send me back." "And now," whispered Dad. The first ship landed before sunrise. It came down quiet. No explosions, no sirens, just the heavy hum of hidden engines. Its black hull gleamed in the morning light. 2 more followed, spreading out across the valley like wolves circling their prey. Inside the cave, Mark loaded the last power cell into his rifle. He checked the battery, then looked over at Lila, who sat still, the teddy bear in her arms, her eyes calm but focused. "They're here," she whispered. "I know." He said, "Are you scared?" "Yes," she replied softly. "But not because of them." Mark paused. "Then what?" "I'm scared of losing you." He walked over and knelt in front of her. "I'm not going anywhere. No matter what happens, you're not alone. Not anymore." Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. "Okay, Dad." The word hit him harder than any weapon could. For a second, the world stopped turning. She had said it before, but this time it was different. This time it was not whispered out of fear, it was said with strength. Outside, branches snapped under boots, voices echoed in the distance. Mechanical and cold. "Unit 7A, surrender yourself. This is your final warning." Mark picked up his rifle and walked out of the cave. He stood tall on the rocky ledge above the valley, wind brushing through his hair, his boots pressed firm into the ground like roots. His eyes locked on the black-clad soldiers moving through the trees, scanners in hand, weapons drawn. Behind him, Lila stepped out slowly. Her small hand slipped into his, and for a moment, the 2 of them stood there, man and child, human and alien, soldier and miracle. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I can go. They won't hurt you if I go." "No," he said. "I won't trade love for safety." The commander of the squad stepped forward, his voice amplified through his helmet. "Mark Reeves, you are harboring stolen government property. Surrender the girl now or face immediate consequences." Mark's voice was calm but firm. "She's not property, she's not a weapon. She's my daughter." A pause followed, then laughter, short and cruel. "She's an experiment gone wrong, a tool with a heartbeat. You don't get to keep her." Mark raised his rifle, not aiming, just showing it. "Then you'll have to take her by force." That was the moment it all changed. Lila stepped forward past Mark, her hands lifted gently into the air, her eyes glowing, not with fear, but with light, warmth, and something ancient, something powerful and pure. "You don't understand," she said, her voice echoing across the valley. "You thought you made me empty, but I'm full. Of love, of kindness, of life." Energy began to ripple around her. The grass trembled, the rocks shimmered, the scanners shorted out in the soldiers' hands, and their suits began to spark. The commander took a step back. "She's activating. Get a net on her, now!" But it was too late. With a sound like rushing wind and broken glass, the valley lit up, not with fire, but with a pulse of peace. Trees bent gently, machines shut down. Even birds returned to the branches. Watching silently, Mark shielded his eyes, and when he looked up again, the soldiers were frozen in place. Not hurt, not dead, but locked in stillness like statues, held gently by the air itself. Lila turned around slowly, her glow fading. "I didn't hurt them," she said, breathing hard. "I just stopped them." Mark stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. "You didn't fight to destroy, you protected. That's real strength." The soldiers remained frozen as Mark carried Lila down the slope, past the ships, past the weapons, past the men who thought they could take her back. They walked all the way home in silence. By the time the government teams arrived later that day, The valley was empty. The soldiers were awake but confused, the ships unresponsive, and the scanners completely dead. The report said, Subject 7A lost in field contact, possibly neutralized. But she wasn't gone. She was safe. Back at the cabin, Mark repaired the greenhouse while Lila watered the plants with her hands. Flowers bloomed where she walked. Light followed her quietly, like it knew her heart. At night, they sat by the fire once again, just like before. But now, Lila smiled more often. She told stories. She laughed, and every night before she went to sleep, she said, "Good night, Dad." Mark would smile, tuck her in, and whisper, "Good night, Lila." She was no longer the girl no one wanted. She was no longer a broken weapon, a failed experiment, a mistake. She was a daughter. She was his. And together, they had changed everything.